Governor J.B. Pritzker is proposing a $55 billion budget, while at the same time warning of the rise of a kind of neo-fascist movement in America led by President Donald Trump. From Capital News, Illinois, it's Friday, February 21st, and this is Capital Cast. Hello and welcome to Capital Cast, a regular podcast of Capital News, Illinois. I'm Peter Hancock, and I'm here again this week with my colleagues Ben Szalinski and Hannah Meisel, and we have all just come through what seems like a very long and busy week covering Governor Pritzker's combination budget address and State of the State speech. I promise we're going to get to the budget proposal in just a few minutes, but I want to talk first about the non-budget part of the speech, the part where the governor is supposed to, and I'm quoting here from the state constitution, report to the General Assembly on the condition of the state and recommend such measures as he deems desirable. To the surprise of many people, what we heard Wednesday afternoon was a lot about Nazis. The word Nazi or Nazis was actually used 6 times near the end of the speech. It was in the context of criticizing President Donald Trump and Trump's flurry of executive orders in the first weeks of his second term, banning such things as diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI initiatives, ordering a halt to congressionally authorized spending, dismantling federal agencies, and ending birthright citizenship, to name just a few. Let's listen to one example of what the governor had to say.
If you think I'm overreacting and sounding the alarm too soon, consider this. It took the Nazis 1 month, 3 weeks, 2 days, 8 hours, and 40 minutes to dismantle a constitutional republic. And all I'm saying is that when the 5-alarm fire starts to burn, every good person better be ready to man a post with a bucket of water if you want to stop it from raging out of control.
Now, Republicans didn't appreciate those references to Nazis, and it appeared that 6 or so of them actually got up and walked out of the House chamber during that portion of the speech. At a news conference after the speech, GOP leaders sort of brushed it off as Pritzker getting ready to campaign for president himself in 2028. Here's Deputy Minority Leader Ryan Spain of Peoria.
I would say, though, he is not going to be running against Donald Trump in 2028. And he needs to understand that as soon as possible, because there's a lot at risk for the state of Illinois by continuing to play the part of antagonizer to the President of the United States.
So, Ben, let's start with you. What was your reaction to that part of the speech, the focus on Nazis? And was it, in fact, do you think, a campaign speech kicking off a 2028 presidential bid?
Certainly could sound like a campaign speech. I think what the governor was really trying to do here, he was trying to talk about this perception he has about what is happening in our federal government, this rise in authoritarianism, this far-right ideologue that has kind of seemed to be very pervasive since Donald Trump was sworn in as president. Everyone's going to read into it what they will, whether it's a campaign speech for 2028 or this is just Pritzker stating his views. Of course, the governor is one of the founding people behind the Illinois Holocaust Museum. He's a Jewish man. He has a lot of thoughts on Nazism, the Holocaust, and these things like that. I think also what he was trying to accomplish here is continuing to do what he's done a lot of since the inauguration, and that's send a message to people in his party. He really has been a little bit disappointed, I think, in a lot of Democrats, not necessarily in Illinois, but around the country, and that not enough are speaking out and speaking up against whatever Donald Trump is doing on that day of the week. He really thinks that Democrats need to be much more forceful about that. And I think this was kind of part of his call to action to draw some more attention to his point of view on these issues. There was another line in the speech there where he said, we don't have kings. I'm not going to bow down to a king. He talked about how he tried to kind of play Trump's games once during Trump's first term in order to get COVID-19 supplies. He said he's not going to be trying to play games like that again to, appease the president's ego or anything like that. So campaign speech, make of it what you will, but he's certainly sending a message to people, I think, on both sides of the aisle.
Well, you're right. There was a remark in there also about how there were people even within his own party who think, well, if we just appease him this once, if we, let him get away with this one thing that he wants, then maybe things will calm down in the future. And that just isn't the way things work in the Trump world. Hannah, wondering what your thoughts are. One thing I was sort of curious about, I've always been told that whenever a conversation turns to Nazi Germany and when people start comparing whatever's going on in contemporary society with what happened in Germany in the 1930s, that's kind of a signal that maybe the conversation has gone round the bend. What were your thoughts on that? Is he being hyperbolic with this, or are there legitimate reasons for concern?
Yeah, I mean, you're describing what's called Godwin's Law, which is, dates back to the early days of the internet in the 90s. I actually spoke with a professor of history who specifically, studies, Jewish history and, has a lot of understanding about this part of, what happened in Europe 90 years ago. And he said that, yes, there are times when, invoking Nazi Germany, you're going to probably lose people that, you want to win over to their side. It's a very difficult thing to, invoke, because when you're invoking it, you are automatically turning off people who feel, insulted. It's a very charged, emotional thing. But at the same time, he said that there are, definite parallels to, the breakneck pace at which the Trump administration has come in this last month, trying to totally remake American policy and definitely consolidate executive power. And he said that, some elements of how the Third Reich, came to power, and, the governor cited just how quickly that happened, 1 month, 3 weeks, etc., should be a lesson about, you're swimming in water and all of a sudden you don't realize what has happened until it's too late.
I do want to turn our attention now to the budget. He presented a $55.2 billion spending plan. That's actually about $2 billion more than the current budget. He said that was still a fairly lean budget. He said a lot of things that people wanted, including things that he wanted, had to be left out this year. And then he had this warning for people who were feeling disgruntled about the amount of money in there and wanting to spend more.
As always, I stand ready to work with members of the General Assembly to deliberate and negotiate the final budget. But let's be clear, I will only sign a balanced budget. If you come to the table looking to spend more, I'm going to ask you where you want to cut.
Hannah, let's start with you. Before the budget speech, there had been dire predictions of a $3.2 billion revenue deficit leading into the next fiscal year. What happened to that deficit, and where does this $2 billion in additional spending come from?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, there was this pretty dire warning of a budget hole. But, kind of as we've seen a few times in the Pritzker administration, there's these warnings of a very tough budget year. But then at some point during the winter, spring, the picture changes. And, in fact, it's a little bit early for such a big change. We might even see a rosier picture come, April. But based on stronger than expected returns from personal and corporate income taxes, sales taxes, that filled quite a lot of the budget hole. The Pritzker administration also built in 1.2, I believe, billion dollars less in estimated spending from November to now. But that $2 billion is still nothing to sniff at. Now, the administration says that 75% of that is kind of due to fixed costs, things like the $350 million annual evidence-based funding formula for schools that dates back to 2017, but also things like pensions. The state pension, we don't call it a crisis anymore. That was more in vogue 10, 12 years ago. But, we're still paying a big chunk of change toward those pensions. And then, we also have these rising healthcare costs that the governor has said that he does want to, kind of get his hands around. Those healthcare costs are in state employee benefits and also to retirees. But then, you have 25% of that $2 billion, which represents, small increases in discretionary spending. I think Ben can speak a little bit more to that, but the governor also tried to make some targeted cuts, basically all in service of trying to, pretend this picture of him being a pragmatic progressive.
Okay. And you mentioned healthcare costs, and I want to turn to Ben on this one because one of the big headlines coming out was something he didn't actually mention out loud, but it was in the budget briefings that we sat through and lawmakers were briefed about it. He basically eliminates or halts funding, at least for this year, for a controversial program that was called Health Benefits for Immigrant Adults, HBIA, which was Medicaid-like healthcare coverage for undocumented immigrants, which Republicans had been harshly criticizing since its inception a few years ago. Ben, what happened to that program?
Yeah, the governor has so far proposed getting rid of the program for people between ages 42 and 64. There's various issues that have come up with this program over the years. 2 years ago, it blew a big hole in the state budget when it exceeded whatever the state thought it was going to cost. This ended up costing more than $1 billion, these two programs for both adults and seniors combined. So in response to that, lawmakers enacted some guardrails. They cut down the ability to enroll in the program, and that put it within about a $500 million budget. So now that the state is facing this spending issue this year and there's tighter constraints on certain areas of the budget, the governor has decided that it's best to forego this program for people between ages 42 and 64. Two main reasons he mentioned when he was talking to reporters after the budget address the other day. For one, he mentioned that people in this age group, they're much more likely to be able to go to work and they can receive health insurance through their job there. The Affordable Care Act marketplace is still an option for people in this group. So they have more options, and he believes that, there's going to be ways that these people won't just be left without health insurance coverage. The other issue that the governor mentioned is that the federal government is not going to be reimbursing for these services for immigrant communities, particularly in the undocumented community. So taking that into account, that's going to leave the state on the hook for more costs on this. And that's where the governor has decided it's better to just move on from this program for now.
And of course, there was predictable reaction from the Hispanic and Latino caucus in the General Assembly, many of whom have, these people are their constituents. They live in their communities. Let's listen to Senator Karina Villa, a Democrat from West Chicago, who is speaking at a news conference after the speech.
I think for a while we've been hearing, right, all of us have been hearing that it was going to be a tough budget year. I think that we expected there to be some things in the budget that we weren't going to be happy with. But I think completely removing a program is not anything that we were expecting.
So there she's saying they weren't expecting it. They apparently hadn't been briefed about it before the speech, but it seemed like kind of a more muted, less angry response than one might have expected from the Latino community. Any thoughts there about why they're not as up in arms about this part of the budget as we might have expected them to be?
Yeah, I think privately they're probably pretty upset about this. This is a program that they've wanted to expand all the way down to people ages 18 and up. So if anything, that they want this to be expanded and certainly not cut. I think what they're really doing here, they're respecting the governor. He's a strong leader in the party. He's popular among both voters and Democrats in Illinois. And I think they're hoping that essentially there's going to be some way where this program can get restored in some form in the budget, whether it's the full thing or there's more guardrails enacted to keep costs down. We'll have to see. But I think they're trying to treat this for what it really is, that this is just the first step in a long series of months of negotiations over the budget, and things are going to change by the time a budget passes in May.
So let me throw this out to both of you. All during, for the last year or so, and especially leading up to the start of the session, we've heard, in one Republican news conference after another, criticizing the Pritzker administration for all the money they spend on what they call illegal immigrants or, undocumented non-citizens, wanting some transparent accounting for all of the money that's being spent on this population. By taking this program out of the budget, have Republicans in effect been defanged on this key issue, which seemed to have some resonance with at least a certain block of voters?
Somewhat, but the fact that Pritzker is going to leave in place the twin program, the earlier program, the healthcare for non-citizen seniors aged 65 and up, still gives them, some ammo, as you say. But also the fact that the money is already gone, it's already spent. I think Republicans can be, upset about that for a long time because, just like, money that was kind of defrauded from Illinois taxpayers, during the pandemic when we had mass fraud in the pandemic unemployment system, we're never going to see that money back. And I think that that's going to, last a long time in terms of things that Republicans or other critics can use against Pritzker.
Okay. And Ben, depending on what polls you want to look at, there's evidence out there to suggest that this was not a good issue for Democrats. Was this as much a political move as it was a budget move? I mean, was there a political upside to just getting away from an issue that might be seen as kind of toxic for Democrats?
Yeah, that was kind of my first thought was, the governor would never say something like that out loud. But, we saw it in the election results that people turned out. They were concerned about illegal immigration. As you mentioned, there are polls out there that show that a decent majority of Americans actually more sides with Donald Trump on the issue of immigration than they do with the Democratic Party. So I think, the governor, he may have heard what Illinois Republicans have been saying and decided that, this may be an issue that he feels comfortable diverging from his party on, because there are a lot of people out there who would rather see these resources put towards, resources for citizens or other areas of the state budget, for example. Ultimately, we'll have to see if this actually follows through, if this program actually does go away. But I think, in some ways, it could be a liability politically within his own party, but among the general public, he may kind of win some support for maybe what you would call a more conservative budget tactic and being willing to go back on something that his party really supports and that he supported as well for many years. Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it at that for this edition of Capital Cast.
Capital Cast is a production of Capital News Illinois, a public affairs reporting project of the Illinois Press Foundation, with significant funding from the Robert R. McCormick Foundation. Until next time, on behalf of the entire Capital News Illinois team, this is Peter Hancock saying thank you for listening.